quickly first thank you very much for the awesome introduction. So I will be talking about the ransomware. I'll give you a little bit more feedback from a realistic point of view and practical point of view what happens within the companies, but I will also go through what I have learned from different research and discussions with different cybersecurity professionals across the world. But to give you a little bit more background about myself, so I'm not going to bore you with half an hour of bio, be assured of that. Just a quick one. So I started my career in France, where I finished my PhD in telecommunication engineering, and at the same time, I was so bored that I started trying to, and I'm really here, serious, I tried to break Hotmail. I was just bored. So anyway, we go through the years from France to Qatar, Middle East, and then now I'm based in Singapore, where I try to help companies and especially chief information security officers to bring their business into a more resilient, secure state, or literally try to at least protect themselves a little bit, because the reality is they're far behind in almost most of the industries, apart eventually financially. So I would like first to thank all the public contributors to ransomware research, and especially one particular person, Rick Ferguson, who is the VP Research on Trend Micro. The reason is because I met Rick in Australia and we had an amazing talk and discussion about what they have found about ransomware in the latest research. And I've used some of his insight in this presentation. Let's get it started. So, who here has been working with ransomware? Who has a very good knowledge and understanding of ransomware? Can I see some more energy? Come on, guys! Woo! So, who has some experience with ransomware? Not many apparently. So don't say that publicly, please. But ransomware has been actually the biggest fear of companies. They are not ready, they don't know exactly how to start, they have protective controls, and they do not have enough knowledge in general about ransomware itself. So if we look at the types of ransomware that we have in the wild, we have the encrypted ransomware, the local ransomware, and the MDR ransomware. And what are the differences? Is that each of one of those will have a different process to encrypt or restrict access to the OS or the files. Like the first one, which actually encrypts the file, the second one doesn't allow you, for example, to boot, and the third one managed to actually address the boot system of the OS. So the main actually common point of all those ransomware or any malware in the wild, which I always say to the companies, is that it doesn't run by itself. So when we talk about malicious software, and you probably, most of you know that, it just needs to have an action from the end user. And then if you have credentials, then you can run your privilege escalation or just, try to run any other malware because you got already an initial access to the system. And mostly this happens because some of the employees will click on a phishing link. And when I have seen phishing simulations, there was no even one company with 0% of clicks on phishing emails. Every time someone would click on a phishing link. Having this illusion, or I would say perception, that if the company will do awareness, their employees will not click on any links, it's actually a proper total illusion. So that's where we are having this situation. And of course, the ransomware and the type of ransomwares have been increasing and decreasing depending on the time. And currently, the situation is that we have seen a decrease in a certain group of ransomware and an increase in sophisticated targeted attack. Who knows why this is happening? Any idea? So the reason, of course, if we're talking about coming from solution providers, is that they're getting more sophisticated and they they get good results in preventing ransomware. And therefore, they consider themselves actually being able to detect the ransomware types. And therefore, the commonly known ones are very easily detectable, and the only ones that remain are the ones that are more sophisticated, of course, in the views of the solution providers or the companies, because we're going to see that this one, and it doesn't, for me, seem such a big technical sophistication. And then, of course, in their opinion, the number of actually interest from the ransomware criminals, or the ones that are spreading that, is also limited to getting the quickest and the biggest payout. Obviously, right? So what's happening is that we have a type of ransomware that they're trying to avoid the current, again, prevention solutions or detection solutions. And those type of ransomware are trying to evade the security solutions that we have in the market. By evasion, we have certain different techniques, and one that has been used is the fact to use legitimate certificates. And this is the technique that has been used by LockerGoga, and I will come back to that. But just to see of how most of the ransomware arrives to the company's system and networks. As you can see in the slide, most of them are coming through spam, phishing, compromised credentials. So let's come back. Is it so difficult? No, it's not. It's actually very simple. Especially if you see at the latest phishing attempt, when they will tell you, you got a new job. Please click on the attachment to see the job description. Guess what? 80% of the employees will just open the attachment. Especially if they tell you you will get a 50% raise. And that's the reality. So no matter what companies put in place, there is still the risk of the employees clicking on that. And of course, afterwards, it depends on the security controls of the company. Will that program run properly or not? And this is the reality. So one, we said that employees are clicking on the phishing links all the time, every day. But then, the most common problem or challenge that companies are facing, and that's also the reality why cyber attacks are being so successful, is that companies do not patch or do not have the time to patch. So they have vulnerabilities like, the easiest vulnerabilities that you can actually exploit in less than 2 minutes. What I'm talking about? I'm talking about, of course, the type of attack that WannaCry. And this, if you go in the wild and check the number of vulnerabilities that are still vulnerable to an attack similar to WannaCry, you will be more than surprised. That is the real world where we are now. So if the situation changes, we might see a lot of decrease of cyber attack and successful cyber attacks, of course. But how do companies do? They try to get information like this one. And this information will help them to eventually ensure manual security controls to reduce the probability of being attacked. Why? Because one, they will try to limit the local administrative privilege. Second, they will try to ensure that only limited employees have administrative privilege. But will that be every time successful? No, especially if it's a manual process. So they will need to review those privileges through Excel files, for example. Not talking about the fact that a lot of time the administrator will be the one person, and if that person leaves the company, maybe the credentials are still there. So what they do, they take this kind of file and they try to ensure that they have some controls over how and if the files can run. Now, let's talk about one of the biggest ransomware attacks of this year. And we have the North Hydro that has been attacked with a ransomware in March 2019. The company that is known for being an aluminum provider has been in need to shut up several plants, including the ones in Norway and Qatar, and run manual process because of the ransomware. There's two things here that are really important to understand. One, it's a particular industry. We are talking about aluminium providers, which is not a financial institution, which means systems like SCADA and other industrial systems. Why I'm saying that is because those are the ones that have the least regulation from a cybersecurity point of view and the least maturity compared to the financial industry. On top of that, we are talking about attacks, as I mentioned, that are more commonly started by a phishing attack. Just a link that is sent to someone, or spear phishing with a targeted email conversation to the administrator, or worse, administrator, I guess, there is an awareness about cyber attack. Who is the most popular target? CEO of companies with no proper cybersecurity awareness or knowledge. So if that starts and the company doesn't have enough maturity and doesn't have the right controls, then of course it leads to companies like North Hydro getting to stop proper operations, and that will cost a lot of money. But let's start with the infection and how actually it was started with that particular company. So it was actually dropped and executed by the PSExec tool, which is an administrative tool that also has been abused by other ransomwares like Bad Rabbit, and I'm sure you've heard about it. But again, here in that case, it's not possible to run an administrative tool unless you have credentials. So let's take an example. You send a phishing email, someone enters the credentials, and that is a non-administrative or privileged account. Then you do your privilege escalation, and you get your admin account, and you can run whatever you want. But that's basically how it can start. And LockerGoga is no exception. So after the ransomware was dropped and executed with that, it's actually interesting how it managed to be evaded from the security controls. Because even if we're talking about immature companies, at least most of them have antiviruses and anti-malware installed in their systems. It's also actually something that is debatable. Because of course we know that not all anti-malware can detect all malware. That is something that depends not only on the brand, but we are aware that every day we have more than 300,000 new malware in the wild. So unless you have really tools that allows you to detect behavioral changes, then your tool probably will not detect things like LockerGoga. So let's come back to this. So the first, they managed to get credentials, they managed to get their privilege escalation, and they run the PSExec tool that allows them to run because they use an evasion technique using an official certificate. And this is actually something that makes the companies whitelist the software, and the software can run on the system. And if you are looking at the technique, such certificates are available on the dark web very easily to buy. And they're both, and one of the examples that I found is actually a Russian example. So я говорю по-русски, не понимаю очень хорошо. So apparently I have a shock, no? Russian, no, not Russian black, Polish black. But anyway, this is how it starts. It's very easy to buy on the dark web. And I guess it's actually even easy to find in general. The biggest hacking tool, which I like this to actually mention, is of course Google. You can find anything on Google. So when we have the PSExec tool, we use a legitimate certificate that allows us evasion, and then we can start to run. But the executable, I need my shots. It's my first time here. Cheers, everyone! ROOTCON! Awesome! So, let's restart. Cheers again, by the way. So, let's talk about the executable. So, it's compiled, just as a general information, it's compiled by Microsoft Visual Studio, and it's signed by a legitimate certificate which allows the evasion. What's really interesting is that the executable is actually copied to temporary directory, and as you can see. But that's not the most interesting. The most interesting is that actually this ransomware runs a certain number of child processes that is equal to the CPU cores in order to ensure efficiency in time and of course efficiency in the result that they want to achieve. So they want to encrypt the most of the files. And how does that happen? Is again, one, the program, the executable will try to ensure that the number of child processes equal to the CPU cores. But then, what's really interesting is that every child process will encrypt the file with a randomly generated AES key, and then the file will actually add as well, the encryption key will be encrypted by a public RSA key at the end. So you have your file that's encrypted with AES key, and then you have your encryption key that is encrypted with the RSA public key. And that is how they are able to decrypt the files afterwards. Is that clear? Yeah, cool. So that actually, also as you can see, the process acts in general runs as well with some parameters. The parameters, as an example with the one that is n, allows to ensure that your executable is not run several times and is actually scheduled properly. And this is again efficiency in time and efficiency in what they are doing in the activities. So apart of that, the child processes will have as well as recorded the path of the file that is only just coded by base 64. Then I would like to come back on that. So again, the files are encrypted by a randomly generated AES key. That key is then using a random generated number. As an example, they use AES 128, which means that it's 32 bytes. They will use the 16 first bytes as an initialized vector, and then the last 16 bytes as the key. And that is how, again, then afterwards they will use the hard-coded RSA public key for each file and in the decoding program, because they can actually send the decoding program after sending the ransomware request to the client and tell them, okay, you can now decrypt your files, which is also different. I'll come back to that. And the reason why they're using AES keys encryption rather than RSA is because AES actually is a common technique. You will use AES encryption because it's much quicker and efficient in terms of time comparing to RSA. But of course, AES, as it's randomly generated and is different from one, they use also an additional way to decrypt the files, and therefore they will use the RSA as the way to allow them to decrypt the files afterwards. So again, in summary, AES is usually used for bulk data encryption, and RSA is more time-consuming and resources-consuming, and therefore they will be used only for the total decryption. Afterwards, when they manage to encrypt and ensure that all those files have been encrypted, they will communicate, of course, and ask the client or the end users to pay the ransom. And in general, some of the feedback that I got, which actually I find interesting, is that whenever you are asking about ransom, some of the cyber criminals, and I really make always the difference, because when I work with companies, they have tendency to mistake very often hackers and cyber criminals. So always make that distinction. because it's not the same. So what they do is they try to get the ransom. But one interesting thing is that sometimes they send the ransom request to the client and they will tell you, okay, send me 2, 3 files and I'm going to show you that I can decrypt it, right? Funny comment from my business partner, big collection here, is that if we're looking from a business perspective, and especially when we're talking about compliance, you basically, as a client, are sending confidential data to the cyber criminals, asking them to decrypt them. So they will have the data of some clients and some very, very big companies and very confidential data without them even stealing those information because the companies will just send the files. In this case, even LockerGoga case, they actually tell the client, we're going to provide you the tool to decrypt your files. And as we said, the RSA keys are coded in the tool and therefore they can actually decrypt it. The communication starts using different protocol mail, and again, one thing that is really interesting here is that whatever companies receive emails in general, first of all, it's very hard for them to understand where they're coming from, whether they're legitimate or not. And second thing, they will still reply, and they will still click on the link, they will still open the attachments. So I want to just make that as an additional comment. So an example of someone who want to really be malicious, you send the ransom, you get to encrypt all the files of the company, then you ask them to send some files so you can decrypt them, so you have confidential data, but you can actually infect them in other things if you send them other attachments or other files. That's the reality. So again, how to manage that is by different kind of prevention and detection. I'll come back to that. But this is basically how it works. So in summary, if we're talking about LockerGoga, again, compromised credential, privilege escalation, then an executable that is used in the legitimate certificate that allow them to evade the security controls of the company. Then, when the executable runs, it will ensure that it runs a parent process with a child number process that is equivalent of the CPU cores to ensure efficiency and speed. Then, at the same time, they will use AES encryption for bulk data encryption using RSA encryption to decrypt the AES keys. And that, of course, means that as well, this ransomware can be really very destructive, because the very bad perception from companies is that I have a backup, then I don't mind of having a ransomware attack. I'm going to come back to that. It still doesn't mean anything if they have a backup. But why it's really important to know in a bit. The detection, how it usually happens, and how in general companies are trying to ensure control. As I mentioned at the beginning, some of the companies will have a list and type of files and just ensure that the files are not possibly executed within the machines. But also they will say some information like, okay, what are the compromised proofs of an endpoint, and they will try to blacklist that from execution. So, okay, when it comes to prevention of this kind of ransomware, and if we're having here any system administrator or IT manager who's from the defensive side, who can tell me actually? How many are from the defensive side? Okay, lots. So this is for you, because I got IT operations and IT managers telling me that they are very well protected from ransomware. And by having backups, by having some of the files not being able to be executed. And again, this actually has been as well the research and the consolidation from the public researchers that I mentioned at the beginning. I really want to thank them because it's a huge work. But I'm going to add what I see from my perspective. Again, the backup side is not enough, because even if you have a backup, the reason and the most innovative ransomwares are using additional techniques to ensure that they encrypt as well the backup. Especially if the companies have an online backup that goes regularly on the same servers and they don't have this proper separation. And it does happen. So companies might think that versioning and backup will save them. But the the main challenge again is that those backups can be encrypted as well. Then, of course, when you're talking about emails and how to block the execution of the file, what? No more microphone? And a shout. Do you hear me? So, what? Really, that's a word. I was too loud. So, one actually really interesting point that I liked in the prevention controls is, as you can see, a restriction of program execution, but making sure that any program runs with a notebook. I really like that. Easy, simple to implement, but will ensure that no program will run. The other reason why I'm saying that is because having the assurance that your local administrator or your local machine will not have admin or root admin privileges on the whole networking machine is something you will be only able to ensure if you have very sophisticated tools. So if you're working with manual processes, ensure that you actually just have at least that aim. Reduce the number of possible executable programs. That would be definitely successful. And then coming back to the wrong assumptions. So the backup that actually will not always save you. No matter which company you are, no matter where you put the backup, it's because it encrypts the files and as well it encrypts the backup, overwriting the good backup. But the other really interesting perhaps point for you is why do you think companies actually pay the ransomware most of the case, even if they have a backup that wasn't encrypted? Anyone knows? Sorry? Maybe down? Leak out. Perhaps, but there's another reason. What is the most important thing that drives companies, and why do they not implement security controls? Many. So to restore the backup sometimes will be more expensive, operationally more expensive than just paying the ransom. And that's where, again, coming back on the most recent ransomware successful attacks are targeted, sophisticated, because the cyber criminals know that. And therefore, companies are ready to pay for the ransom instead of running their backup process. That means that instead of having just a normal backup testing, you should as well have a ransomware scenario testing, where you ensure that your incident management process takes care as well of the scenario where you are attacked by ransomware, for all the ones who are working with the defense part. And to finish, who is in the game? Again, as I mentioned, the very popular ransomware that are simple, like targeting the mass market with some links or some files, are actually decreasing. The reason why they're decreasing is because we're having a lot of solutions in the market providing behavioral analysis tools that allows you to stop if the solution if a ransomware is trying to encrypt files. And I had a very interesting discussion with one of those solution providers. And of course, I won't mention the brand, but I try to understand how they detect that and how do they stop any ransomware from encrypting the files. And the reality is that some of those tools will still not manage to ensure that all the files are not encrypted, because they will stop the encryption process after some of the files got encrypted. So this is also something for you to consider whenever you're actually feeling that the tools that you're implementing are efficient. So again, who is in the game and who is remaining are the ones that are more sophisticated, the ones that target companies. And if you're looking at the maturity and the ease of launching general ransomware attack, is still very easy to do. Again, because of patch management, that's really a complex routine or a complex process for companies, but as well because employees fix the rates. So I hope you enjoyed the speech and the talk. Thank you very much. And I hope to discuss with you more today. And let's get the